So next we go into the inner world of sentient beings. So this is just the beginning of this section, and we're in chapter 8, the development of the body. And so here we have the initial presentation of this inner world, and the first topic is the development of the body, which has 3 parts. First one is the bardo of the being about to take birth. And here it talks a little bit about the bardo body is taught to be a body composed of subtle particles. Now this is pretty unique. I wouldn't say it's exclusively so, but it's pretty unique to Kalachakra to talk about these subtle particles. We were introduced to those a little bit earlier, but it is an important philosophical, I would say, rather than physics-based approach to this, although there are some analogies in physics as well. And so then it says the great commentary, and then that quote right below that, second line, like a body of a dream, the empty body of imprints abandons the composite of subtle particles, but does not cease. So it lets go of those subtle particles, and then continuing on 162, same quote, once again it will take hold of a body composed of subtle particles. So it goes through these phases of discarding the particles and then coming back with these subtle particles. And that seems to be talking about the process of entering into the bardo and then coming back out of that bardo state. Or at least, I mean, maybe you're still within the bardo, but it's happening at the beginning and the end of the basic bardo state. The bardo body has the form of a mental phenomenon. And it says in the next paragraph there, this literally seems to contradict each other. Here we are again. And so it says it's something we need to examine a little bit. And so the second part of this section is how consciousness enters the blood and fluid after bardo has ceased. And so it might recall that in the early discussion about Kalachakra, it does talk about the approach to the bardo in Kalachakra is different than it is in some of the other tantras. So just keep that in mind here. And so within that category, we have the first part defining the entering consciousness. As the bardo is coming to an end, the mind at that time is the very subtle mind of clear light. Now, we've talked before about the clear light is one of the first appearances of the bardo, the Dharmata bardo. And then it talks about 3 lines down below that, it exists alongside innate bliss and is known as the foundation consciousness and as innate mind. And then it quotes from the great commentary, while the consciousness is in the womb, it is the foundation consciousness, a gnosis of the highest bliss. And then at the very bottom of the page, just below the other short quote, that is the difference between the foundation consciousness assigned to the mind that has just entered the womb and the foundation consciousness explained as the foundation of all by those who assert 8 types of consciousness. So there are many differing assertions concerning the mind that has just entered the womb. And so he starts with the Abhidharma Kosha. It says, birth existence is without delusion, thereby declaring that the mental consciousness is one of mental affliction. In the Abhidharma Samachaya and similar texts, those who assert the collection of 8 types of consciousness describe it as a foundation consciousness. Skipping a line there to the next paragraph, highest tantras such as Kalachakra are in agreement that the clear light nature of mind is the basis of all things in samsara and nirvana. This is the clear light of a bardo death. And the great commentary, this is referred to as the foundation. So he's making a case that there is a similarity between the two in terms of their understanding at this point. Then skipping below that next quote, therefore, the mind that has just crossed over to the womb and the mind of the clear light of death are spoken of as a foundation consciousness. And then, however, this is not a foundation consciousness that is distinct from the mental consciousness as it is taught by those who assert the 8 kinds of consciousness. And the 8 kinds of consciousness we see in the Nyingma tradition, where we talk about the first 6 consciousness, or the basic 5, sense consciousness plus thought would be the 6th one. And then the 7th one is the alaya, or storehouse consciousness, and then the 8th one is the ultimate consciousness. But some break down those last 2 or add even a 9th consciousness, and some only have 7 consciousnesses and so forth. So there's a variety of different approaches philosophically once you get beyond ordinary thought in terms of a consciousness. Moving then down to the bottom of that same paragraph, the thinking behind calling this mind the foundation is that it is the foundation for the arising of all things in samsara and nirvana. So that would be obvious, the foundation, everything arises from that. As an entity, however, it is a mental consciousness. And that's almost an oxymoron. Mental consciousness is, mental and consciousness basically are referring to the same kind of thing, although there are things in the Western view of subconsciousness which are, I suppose, in a way not mental, in that we're not aware of them. They're things that we're not aware of at the time of it being in our mind or in our brain. And then it goes to the great commentary that says in the Gnosis chapter, how does it grasp the womb? Solely as a mental consciousness with the support of bodhicitta. So it's talking about it in the womb state when we're getting to the point of birth or rebirth. Continuing on 164, this clearly states that the mental consciousness alone, supported by a base of red and white bodhicitta, is the consciousness of conception. So at that point, it's just a mental consciousness in the way that it's being described here. So the next subcategory here is how the consciousness then enters. So here we have the 4 places of conception. So it talks a little bit about these different approaches in which beings can be born in the universe. The womb, heat and moisture, the egg, and miraculous birth. And it describes these from the Abhidharmakosha. It says, hell beings, gods, and those between existences are born miraculously. The hungry ghosts can also be born from the womb. And hungry ghosts may be of miraculous birth or womb birth. For humans and animals, there are the 4 kinds. All 4 kinds of birth can be found within the human and animal realm. And then there's a long quote in which it gives examples of each of these. Then at the top of 165 on the 3rd line there, in Kalachakra, all existent phenomena are assigned to the 5 or 6 elements. And remember, that's a key point in terms of looking at how things are structured in the Kalachakra. To assign the 4 kinds of birth to 5 elements, miraculous birth is divided into 2 types, mere and great. The mere miraculous birth is assigned to the earth element. Great miraculous birth refers to well-known miraculous births. So the kind of things that are otherwise known as miraculous births there. Skipping the short paragraph and going into the following one, so this is in the 3rd paragraph on page 165, 2nd line. Here in the inner chapter, the primary ascertainment is that of a sentient being possessed of a womb-born human body of the 6 elements. So we're talking about human birth here, not other forms of sentient beings. And 2 lines down, what is the purpose It is to know and understand the basis of purification for the generation and completion stages, as well as the locations for the practice of penetrative focusing in the completion stage. And then the next paragraph. Amid the blood and fluid of the mother and father, these are symbolic here, in union arises the mental consciousness of the previous bardo being. Remember, that's where we left it. It was in a mental consciousness state. This is a very subtle mind of clear light known as the foundation. The consciousness, fluid, and blood are then united within the mother's womb, from which will develop the body of a sentient being. This is supported by the element of earth of the mother's secret lotus, gathered together by her element of water, matured by her element of fire, made larger by her element of air, and given the room to grow by her element of space, in its aspect of empty space within the womb. So we have the 5 elements here, and they also perform various individual functions, which it goes on then to list in detail. So moving ahead then to page 166, the top here, just before the quotation. Concerning the development role of the winds, the great commentary says, and then the quote, the 10 great winds, such as the life-sustaining wind, etc., enlarge the form of this seed. Of course, it does that as it just described through the element, through the winds of the mother in the various form, and the elements of the mother having an effect on this body in the womb. And then skipping down the last 3 lines in the next chapter below the quote, the next paragraph below the quote, the great commentary in this section says, this speaks of the activity of the seed's own elements, thereby confirming that this passage is referring to the air element of the seed of fluid and blood itself. So now he's saying that it's really the essence of this development comes from inside this particular body, the mental body now. And even though it's facilitated by the winds and so forth of the mother, that the energy that actually causes this to happen comes from within the actual seed itself, which is the mental body that has formed there. So then it talks about development in the womb. So now we've initiated this process. And then it says, the womb until death is taught in correspondence with the 10 incarnations of Vishnu. And then it goes through these, describes each of these. So it talks about Veda in the Vedas. They had sunk into, or Vishnu had sunk into an ocean, and so it talks about the fish and the turtle and the pig and the form of man and the lion and the midget and Rama and even Buddha Shakyamuni. So it goes through 10 different forms of Vishnu that are described here. I think it's very clear that these are all being described as metaphors based on the legends and stories of Vishnu as a part of that. Then going to, following the really long quotation here at the bottom of page 167, we have a second short quotation. Many false words were written by malicious Brahmins at the time of the Buddha. These are not in the early Vedic literature. So there are things that have been written that are used as contradictory discussion points, let's say. And what he's saying here is they just made it up. It's not really in the Vedas. You can dig through the Vedas and you can't find these things that they are articulating. So if we go to page 168, And there are a couple of short quotes there, and then just down below that we have, although these stories are fabrications, the terminology of the 10 avatara, or incarnations, used to explain the corresponding times from the first moment of conception to death. So then he goes through and he describes these as analogies here, and goes on another page or so, on page 170, in the middle of the page, below this set of verses, in the second line, these are understood differently by different commentators. Some explain clairvoyance in the womb as a natural occurrence, as it's talking about remembering past lives as we near the time of birth, that the consciousness then gets to a point where it's able to function in a way that it can remember those past lives. So in this next fairly long quotation here, it says, however, the process of birth, being squeezed by the mother's body, the touch of the earth, the touch of the hands, the pain of being washed, all dominate the mind and body, and the past lives are forgotten. So here we have an explanation of why we don't recall our past lives, in most cases at least. There are, of course, stories and that have been tracked even in relatively contemporary research talking about past lives, which then brings up the question, why are some people able to remember past lives whereas most of us are not? Anyway, continuing on, top of page 171, and just below the quote that follows the one we just looked at, other scholars say that although such experiences may arise during the time in the womb, they are like dreams. So looking at it a little bit different way. And in that quote that follows in the third line, qualities such as clairvoyance must be special phenomena that manifest in the womb by the power of particular causes created in previous lives. This, my omniscient master has said, even though the being in the womb possesses that particular quality for 6 months, it will reside in the womb in a kind of unconsciousness and with no memory. Then at this particular time it remembers in this way. It was in order to make this point that this was spoken of. So he's trying to explain the occurrence of this form of understanding and recall about this. And then it goes on through, he's continuing the development process through the 7th and 8th months, and then at the bottom of the page here, the last paragraph, concerning the emergence from the mother's womb, some beings emerge as soon as 9 months are completed. Some are born in the 10th month, some in the 11th, while others may be born in the 12th month. I don't think so, unless they're talking about different months than what we understand them to be. I was having a conversation just yesterday with a physician about that point. She said, no way. So again, just don't take it too literally. You know, some babies are born a little bit longer after a longer period than others are. Some are born in these days more likely perhaps in a much shorter period than in a much longer period. Preemies. So then continuing on page 172 in the third paragraph, 13 months after conception, channels are complete. The 14th month, expansion of the red and white elements. In the girls, the red menstrual element increases until the time of menstruation at age 12. After that, the increase is halted. In boys, the white fluid element increases until the time of semen emission at the age of 16. From then on, the increase is halted. Now again, their biology leaves a little bit to be desired, but it gives you the general idea of what happens. After birth, the teeth appear. 8 years later, they fall out. It seems a little bit long to me, but 8 years later, they fall out and are replaced. And then a few lines down, from the growth of gray hair until the day of death is designated as the time of the Buddha. This is because just as the Buddha has a mind at peace and is of stable behavior, so the aged are of peaceful minds, and because they lack the sexual company of women, are of stable behavior. So those of us with gray hair must be of stable behavior. Okay, then in the next paragraph, at the end of that next paragraph, short paragraph, at the time of death, all the elements come together as one. And so that concludes the formation of the body. So we've gone through a description of how the body is formed in the description in Kalachakra. So then we get to the second aspect here, which is phenomena supported by such a body, and it has two parts here. The first one is a general explanation, and then a particular explanation focused on the channels, winds, and drops. That particular explanation, though, is not in this chapter, but chapter 9, the next chapter. So here we'll only be looking at the general explanation. So at the top of page 173, there are many phenomena supported by the body of a being endowed with the 6 elements. They include the 6 elements, namely space, air, fire, water, earth, and gnosis. So a lot of what we've been talking about didn't include the gnosis element, which is one that's unique here in Kalachakra. We usually just talk about the 5 elements, and most of what we've been talking about in terms of the outer world has also been described, although there were a couple of references to gnosis. Generally it's been described in terms of the 5 elements, but now we're bringing back this gnosis element into this. And then it also includes the 6 aggregates. Again, we usually talk about 5, but here we have 6. So it's our consciousness, mental formations, feelings, recognition, form, and gnosis being added back in again here. Then the 6 organs: ear, nose, eyes, tongue, body, and mind. And then we have the 6 sensory source objects: sound, smell, form, taste, contact, and mental phenomena. And then the 6 faculties made up the secret place. Those are the sex organs: the voice, the hands, the legs, the anus, and the supreme organ, which is, they think, the lower channel below the navel. Okay, and then the 6 activities of these faculties are urinating, speaking, talking, moving, excreting, and emitting fluid. The 6 winds: life-sustaining, coexisting, upward moving, pervading, naga. That, I think, is the one being included here that's not in the usual list, because usually we're talking about 5 of those winds. And then the downward expelling. It also continues on another line or two down with the 6 chakras: the crown, heart, throat, forehead. So we have both crown and forehead here. And then the navel and secret place. And then also included are the 21,600 winds as a part of this, the 72,000 channels, and the 360 bones and 360 joints. So it's giving a little bit more complete picture than what we normally see in descriptions of all of these components. And then at the top of the next paragraph, none of the above phenomena are beyond the nature of the 6 elements. And then it goes through and starts to give detail about each of these categories that we just summarized in the previous paragraph. So first he talks about the 6 aggregates. In the next paragraph, the sense organs, continuing on page 174. The next paragraph are the 6 faculties. And then the next paragraph, the winds and chakras, and then the next paragraph, the bone structure. And then at the bottom of that paragraph, it talks about the 32 teeth should be understood as being phenomena of these 4 elements within the pairings of earth and air as method and wisdom, and fire and water as method and wisdom. Space and gnosis as method and wisdom cover all phenomena. So kind of a summary there of how some of these pull together. And then the next paragraph, at the bottom of 174, the colors of phenomena. And so it goes through each of those. Space is green, air black, fire is red, water is white, earth is yellow, and gnosis is blue. So Kalachakra has some slightly different color schemes that it uses than what we typically see in most tantras and in most other teachings. Like if you go through the 6 yogas of Naropa, the channels, winds, and drops descriptions in there are a little bit different in terms of various aspects here. And finally, the last paragraph, it says that this is applied to all 6 families. Again, we normally talk about 5 Buddha families. Here he's talking about 6. And so we have the space with the Vajra family, air with the Karma family, fire with the Jewel family, water with the Lotus family, earth with the Wheel family or Buddha family, and then the Gnosis, adding that in here, of the curved knife family. Now, I couldn't find exactly what that means, but my guess would be the consorts, since the consorts are always the ones carrying the curved knife. So, the next chapters that we're going to be looking at, which we are skipping next week because of the teachings. So 2 weeks, we'll be looking at chapters 9, 10, and 11, which cover the channels, winds, and drops, the various discrepancies among initiations again, and qualifications of a master and disciple as a part of that. So that's where we are and where we are headed.